I was scrolling through Instagram recently when I came across this video. It says, you know you've peaked as a Virgo when all you do is wear black garbs and plan your death. Now, there are a lot of other videos like this on his account too, and it seems like this individual has moved to another country in order to access euthanasia, assisted suicide, because of his mental illness. Now, crazily enough, there are other stories like that out there. For example, in 2018, a 29-year-old Dutch woman was voluntarily euthanized because of her mental illness. Regarding her decision, she wrote, "I'm 29 years old and I've chosen to be voluntarily euthanized. I've chosen this because I have a lot of mental health issues and I suffer unbearably and hopelessly. Every breath I take is torture." Now, moreover, Canada, the country that I live in, is currently in the process of legalizing euthanasia for those suffering from mental illness alone, although it has been paused until at least 2027. Is this something that we should allow for people who are suffering from mental illness alone? Is it discriminatory to not allow that? Moreover, if we believe that people actually have a right to these services, and if they're consenting to it, it seems that on the basis of a lot of modern ethical frameworks, there isn't much to object to. Now, a lot of you might be wondering what in the world is going on here. How have we gotten to a point in our culture where not only are these public policy shifts being argued for and happening in countries like my own, which is supposed to be part of the civilized West, but how do we even respond to people who are struggling with these desires? How do we give an argument that somebody's life is worth living, and why does it seem so hard to do so, especially if the individual is the one choosing it? In this video, I'm going to attempt to answer those questions, but ultimately I also want to help identify the fundamental value shift and this shift in an understanding of human identity that I think is to blame, or at least in part to blame, for the shifting perspectives on medical assistance in dying. Now, Albert Camus once famously declared that the only truly serious philosophical problem is that of suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy, he says. Now, honestly, this sounds very grim, and it is, but it has become increasingly true in the context of modernity, especially since the death of God, for people to question really what is the point of it all. If it's not really objectively meaningful, if there's no objective goodness that we're striving towards, if we're all just floating on a big rock in space, then why are we here? Albert Camus famously used the myth of Sisyphus to provide an image of the human condition. The myth is essentially that Sisyphus was condemned to carry this rock up of a hill for eternity, only for it to fall back down again, and it's repeated forever. Now, this is supposed to be a picture of the human condition because it seems that it's very meaningless. He declares that although objectively we don't have much meaning, we can just choose to be happy. And that's why he famously declares we have to imagine that Sisyphus is happy. So ultimately, human meaning is achievable, Camus says, even in an objectively meaningless universe, if we choose it. Now, I definitely disagree with Camus' conclusion, but I do think that the image that he uses is very important to analyze. He's carrying that rock all by himself. And moreover, he has to make the choice that he finds meaning and purpose in the work that he's doing all by himself. So ultimately, meaning for Sisyphus and for Camus ultimately isn't actually rooted in the external world. It's not found objectively anywhere. It's in us. We choose it for ourselves. We subjectively determine it. It is an act of the human will. Now, that sounds liberating to some, like, okay, I guess I am the one making that choice. But it seems that there's another question relevant here to answer, which is, what if Sisyphus just let the rock crush him? What if Sisyphus just gave up? Now, freedom is at the core of this depiction of reality and human identity. So if freedom is at the heart of our meaning as human beings, then how can you object to somebody freely deciding to just opt out? How can you object to somebody saying, yeah, I don't like this anymore and I want out? Now, I think that people who have given into euthanasia on the basis of suffering from mental illness are examples of Sisyphus just giving up. These are people who I've been told, I think, culturally, that meaning is within us. It's not objectively out there in the universe. It's nothing for us to discover. And so if it's within us and we choose it, do we not also likewise have the same ability to choose that it's not there? Especially if we discover it by simply looking inwards. For a lot of people, when they look inwards, whatever that's really supposed to mean, by the way, they don't find happiness. They find confusion and they find contradiction. I mean, Blaise Pascal famously declared that man is a paradox. Man is a walking contradiction. On the one hand, we have this great memory of greatness. We have this sense that the world is supposed to be a certain way. We have this sense of goodness. We have this sense of meaning because we have a longing for it. I mean, C.S. Lewis recognizes this in his argument from desire. Nonetheless, the point is simply that we seem to have an affinity for things that are greater than us. On the other hand, when we look inside of ourselves, we find a lot of bad things. We find evil in the world and suffering and anxiety and fear. And on the one hand, we seem to be so great, but on the other hand, we seem to be so small. And it seems that this tension is only further exacerbated when we listen to the claims of the quote-unquote scientism that now reigns supreme in our culture. On the one hand, we have this deep sense that there is a deeper meaning to life. On the other, we are told we are specks of dust floating around in a cosmos that does not care about us. Now, I think when those two things come into conflict, it produces for human beings a great amount of anxiety. Ultimately, I don't think that this view of the world can provide an adequate answer for those who are suffering from mental illness and for those who are seriously considering taking their own lives. In the remaining part of my video, I want to talk more in depth about this view of the self and how we can see it manifesting in our culture, and also demonstrate how I think that this view, when taken to its logical conclusion, does justify euthanasia for those who are suffering from mental illness, but that justification doesn't really sit well with our common sense moral intuition that we should try to talk people out of taking their own lives rather than being supportive of it. These people are just opting out of life. And if we actually believe that life is objectively meaningless, if we buy the tenets of absurdism and scientism, if we tell people, yeah, you've got a sense of goodness, of beauty, of truth, of all of these transcendentals, but really that's just been inculcated into you by evolution, and you are in truth really just a speck of dust floating around on this cosmic rock in a universe that doesn't know you exist or care about you, but also you can make sense of that. But it's up to you. I don't know how people who are struggling with mental illness can hear a message like that and just think, yeah, that provides me with a really good reason not to decide to have my life ended, thank you. Because it doesn't. And finally, just a note on logical consistency. I think if you take this position to its logical conclusion, right, which is that meaning, again, is subjectively determined and is therefore located in the human will, it's not located objectively out in the universe, then if that's true, and it's up to each person to determine that their lives have meaning, then when somebody decides it doesn't, you don't really have any ground to stand on to try to argue with them that it doesn't. So if somebody tells you that their internal standard tells them that it's just not worth it anymore, you can't appeal to anything, because again, the standard is in them. If you try to appeal to something outside of them, you're demonstrating that there is a standard, or at the very least that you think there is a standard outside of them. It seems that what this view would logically require people to do sits very at odds with what we want to do, with what we feel an inclination to do. In fact, a lot of the comments on the guy's video from the beginning of this video were like, hey, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, there's something intuitively wrong with it. There's something that when we hear it, we're like, oh, I don't know. Like, you're worthy. You're worthy of life. You should enjoy your life. But again, that criticism, that response presupposes that the value of life is not rooted just in us, but in something outside of us. In fact, when I was doing research for this video, I was trying to find other examples of cases like this guy's, and every time I searched something online or on TikTok, what did I get? Hotlines. Because culturally, in practice, when somebody tells us they don't feel like their life is worth living anymore, we don't just say, okay, dude, you do you. We immediately respond with skepticism. What do you mean? Are you sure about that? Have you considered this option or therapy? People care about you, we often say. We try to dissuade them out of it. And again, I just want to make my point clear that I do not think that is consistent with the view of meaning that absurdism or secularism seems to imply. That's really my point. If you want to bite the bullet and say, you know what, ultimately, I do think that euthanasia should be accessible for these individuals, that's fine. You can just bite the bullet and we can basically just agree to disagree. But I do want to implore you to at least be consistent and try to explain or justify why you've got an intuition that that shouldn't be the case. Why do we have the hotline response? Why do we try to respond by telling people it's not worth it? Ultimately, I think it's because we do believe that their lives are actually meaningful beyond what they personally decide. There's one more thing I want to say in closing this video. I focused a lot on the image of Sisyphus carrying that burden. A lot of you might feel like you are Sisyphus. You are in a position like him. You might feel that you are carrying a very heavy burden and that it is so heavy it might just crush you, and you might not know what to do about it. If that's you, I just want you to close your eyes and picture somebody saying these words to you. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The burden of existence is painful and it is heavy. But the Christian story doesn't deny that, and I'm not denying that. But Christians also posit that there is a God who not only exists, but bore that burden for you, now offers you his, and his is easy and light. I want to offer to you today that you can take that yoke. You don't have to carry it all by yourself, that there is somebody willing to carry it with you and who is willing to give you his own. And I don't know about you, but I think I will take the burden of Christ over the burden of the world any day of the week. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please let me know. Like it, subscribe, that'd be great. And until next time.